On certain nights at Hogwarts, when the castle seems to breathe a little more slowly, and even the portraits have settled into their frames for rest, small mysteries have a way of drifting quietly into being. They do not announce themselves with flashes of light or loud spells. Instead, they arrive like a thought half remembered or a feeling that something familiar has shifted just slightly out of place. This is one of those nights, and this is one of those mysteries. Tonight's tale begins in the Great Hall, a place usually defined by joyful noise and orderly tradition. Long wooden tables stretch beneath a ceiling, enchanted to mirror the sky, candles floating above them like patient stars. By day, the hall hums with chatter, clinking cutlery, and the comforting predictability of where everyone belongs. But by night, when the last echoes of laughter fade and the doors close with a gentle finality, the great hall becomes something softer, more thoughtful. It is then that the past seems closer and the castle's memories rest nearer to the surface. Outside, the wind moves carefully around the towers, carrying the distant hoot of an owl and the faint rustle of leaves along the grounds. Inside, lantern light glows warmly against ancient stone, and the banners of the four houses hang quietly, their colors deep and calm. Everything feels settled, and yet not entirely complete, as if the hall itself is waiting to be noticed. This story is about a seating plan, an old one, long unused and slowly forgotten, not merely a list of names or a rule to be followed, but something woven with intention, memory, and a gentle kind of magic. It is about how places remember people, and how even something as simple as where one sits can hold meaning far beyond the surface. The mystery does not rush. It unfolds the way a quiet evening does, one soft moment at a time. As you listen, allow yourself to pedal into this calm corner of the wizarding world. Let the glow of candles and the hush of the hall surround you. If you find comfort in these gentle journeys through Hogwarts, you are warmly invited, only if it feels right, to return again, to rest here whenever the day feels heavy or sleep feels far away. For now, take a slow breath and imagine the great hall as it is tonight, empty, peaceful, holding its secrets with care. Somewhere within its long tables and ancient stones, a forgotten order waits to be rediscovered, not to disrupt the calm, but to deepen it. Harry Potter had always noticed things others overlooked, especially in moments when the castle was quiet enough to listen back. On this particular evening, he lingered near the edge of the great hall long after dinner had ended, his steps slow, his thoughts unhurried. There was no urgency pulling him forward, no mystery yet demanding to be solved. Just a calm awareness that Hogwarts, when empty, felt like an old friend settling into a comfortable silence. Ron Weasley waited nearby, leaning against one of the long wooden tables, absently tracing patterns in the polished surface with his finger. He looked relaxed, a rare state for him, his usual worries about homework and upcoming lessons temporarily forgotten. Ron had always loved the Great Hall, mostly for the food, but also for the sense of belonging it offered. Sitting at the Gryffindor table had always felt natural to him, as if it had been chosen long before he ever arrived at Hogwarts. Hermione Granger stood a little apart from them, her arms loosely wrapped around a book she wasn't actively reading. She was gazing upward at the enchanted ceiling, watching the clouds drift slowly across the false night sky. Hermione found comfort in patterns, in systems that made sense, and Hogwarts was full of them, rules layered over rituals, history resting gently beneath the present. Even in silence, her mind moved thoughtfully, connecting small details others might dismiss. The three of them had grown used to sharing moments like this, quiet pauses between adventures, where nothing dramatic happened, and yet everything felt meaningful. They didn't speak much at first, because there was no need to. The hall itself seemed to encourage stillness, as if conversation might disturb something delicate. Not far away, nearly headless Nick floated serenely near the Slytherin table, his translucent form glowing faintly in the candlelight. He watched the students with a fond, distant smile. Nick had seen centuries of Hogwarts, life, countless students coming and going, their habits repeating in familiar cycles. He remembered when seating arrangements had been far more carefully observed, guided by traditions long softened by time. At the high table, Professor McGonagall stood quietly, reviewing a parchment with calm focus. Even she seemed unhurried tonight, her sharp gaze gentler than usual. She noticed the students lingering, but did not interrupt them. There was something reassuring about their presence here, as though the hall itself approved of being remembered. Each of them carried their own relationship with the great hall, Harry with his quiet sense of observation, Ron with his warmth and loyalty, Hermione with her curiosity and respect for structure, Nick with memory, and McGonagall with stewardship. None of them yet realized that these shared connections were more than coincidence. For now, they were simply individuals at rest in a familiar place. But the castle had a way of drawing together those who listened closely. And somewhere within the long tables and empty benches, a forgotten order waited patiently, ready to reveal itself only to those who belonged exactly where they stood. The first sign that something had shifted was so small it might have been mistaken for ordinary candlelight. Harry noticed it because he was the sort of person who, after years of living inside strange enchantments, could feel the difference between a shadow that belonged and a shadow that didn't. He stood near the Gryffindor table, looking down its length, watching the soft gold pools of light tremble on the polished wood. The floating candles above were steady, their flames calm and obedient, and yet the light beneath them seemed to drift as if it were searching for something. Ron followed Harry's gaze, squinting slightly. "What is it?" he asked, quietly enough that his voice didn't echo. "I'm not sure," Harry said. "Just look at the benches." Hermione stepped closer, her book held against her chest. She scanned the table, then the benches, then the floor. At first, everything looked as it always did. Long planks of wood, carved with faint marks left by years of students leaning, laughing, tapping their feet, dropping crumbs, leaving behind tiny signs of life. But then Hermione's eyes narrowed. On the nearest bench, right where a student might sit, There was a thin line of shimmering light, not bright, not flashy. It looked almost like moonlight had somehow slipped indoors and decided to rest there. The line was delicate, as if drawn with a silver thread. Hermione leaned in. That wasn't there earlier. Ron shifted uneasily, though not in fear, more like he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do with something mysterious that didn't seem dangerous. Is it a spell? Harry crouched slightly to look closer. The line was not a crack or a reflection. It had shape. It curved, then straightened, then curved again, like writing. Except it wasn't any ink Harry had ever seen. The silver line brightened faintly, and then, with a softness that felt almost polite, more lines appeared. Letters formed slowly, not carved, not etched, simply revealed. Hermione inhaled gently, the way she did when she was about to discover something she'd been searching for without realizing it. "It's a name," she whispered. Ron blinked. "A name?" Hermione nodded, reading carefully. "It says, Rowena." Harry's eyes lifted to the Ravenclaw banner. It hung in quiet dignity, blue and bronze deep in the dim light. The air in the hall felt still, but not tense, more like the castle itself was listening to see if they were paying attention. "Rowena," Ron repeated, as in Rowena Ravenclaw," Hermione finished softly. They stared at the letters for a moment, letting the meaning settle like a slow snowfall. Then Harry looked down the bench again. "Is there more?" he asked, almost as if it had been waiting for the question. The soft silver light traveled along the bench in a gentle wave, not fast, not dramatic, like someone smoothing a cloth along a table before setting down a meal. And as the glow moved, more names appeared, faint, delicate, and beautifully formed. Helga, Godric, Salazar. Ron's eyebrows rose. "All right," he said quietly. "That is definitely not normal." Hermione's voice stayed calm, but her eyes were bright. "These are the founders' names on the benches." Harry stood slowly, as if moving too suddenly might startle the magic. "Why here?" No one answered immediately. The great hall held its silence, warm and patient. The floating candles continued to glow. The enchanted ceiling showed a sky filled with slow-moving clouds, as if even the heavens above Hogwarts had decided to stay soft tonight. Then another change happened, subtle again, almost gentle enough to miss. A faint sound drifted through the hall, not footsteps, not voices, a rustle, like parchment being unfolded. Hermione turned toward the high table. "Did you hear that?" Ron pointed hesitantly. "Over there, at the center of the high table, where the staff normally sat during feasts, a single sheet of parchment had appeared. It lay flat and neat, as if placed by an invisible hand. The parchment did not glow. It did not flutter. It simply existed, quietly, insistently, as though it had been part of the hall all along and had only just now remembered to become visible. Harry took a step forward. Hermione and Ron followed, their movements careful. As they approached, the parchment's edges lifted slightly, not in a sudden flap, but in a slow invitation. Hermione reached out. She didn't touch it yet. "Wait," she said, not alarmed, just respectful. "It might be protected. Ron swallowed. Protected by what? Hermione's gaze scanned the table. By old magic. Harry looked around the hall. The banners hung above, the candlelight steady. Everything felt calm. The parchment didn't feel threatening. It felt longing, like something that wanted to be read. Harry glanced at Hermione. "You're the careful one," he said. Hermione sighed softly, the hint of a smile on her lips. "I know." She lifted her wand, not with tension, but like someone lighting a candle. "Revelio," she murmured. The parchment shimmered, barely. A soft outline appeared around it, like a protective aura that recognized Hermione's spell and decided it didn't mind. Hermione lowered her wand. "It's not warded against us," she said quietly. "It's waiting for us." Ron leaned in. "So what is it?" Hermione finally touched the parchment, fingertips brushing its surface. It was warm, like it had been held near a fire. She lifted it gently, and as soon as she did, the writing appeared. Not ink, not quill, letters forming in a pale gold that looked like candle flame held still. At the top, in elegant script, were the words, "The lost seating plan of the Great Hall." Ron let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. "You're joking." Hermione didn't laugh. She was reading, carefully. Beneath the title was a set of lines, columns, names, placements. But the strange thing was how the parchment arranged itself as Hermione looked at it. The words shifted softly, like they were aligning to her gaze. Harry leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. The names were not only those of the founders. There were hundreds, students, teachers, perhaps even visitors, names that seemed to drift in and out, appearing briefly and then fading like memories. Hermione's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not a timetable. It's a map of where people sat." Ron frowned. "That's what a seating plan is." Hermione shook her head slowly. "No, this feels like more." As if to confirm her thought, the parchment warmed again, and the shifting names slowed, settling into clear rows. Not the usual 4 long tables, not the standard arrangement Hogwarts had, kept for so long. Instead, the layout showed something different. Circles, small clusters, interwoven placements, students of different houses sitting together in deliberate patterns. Names arranged not by color or crest, but by something else: friendship, balance, perhaps even the needs of the castle itself. Harry's eyes moved across the parchment. He saw familiar names appear for just a moment. Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, not together at the Gryffindor table, but placed in a small cluster, as if the seating plan had expected them to be surrounded by others, names that flickered too quickly to read. Ron swallowed. Why would there be a different seating plan? The houses are important, Hermione said gently, but they weren't always everything. Harry glanced up at the banners. They hung still, but not stiff, quiet, observant. Hermione continued reading. It says, "The seating was once part of the castle's harmony." Ron stared. Hermione nodded, eyes wide with calm astonishment. "Listen to this," she read aloud, her voice soft enough to fit the hall's hush. "When the tables hold only division, the stones grow lonely. When the hall remembers balance, the castle rests." Ron blinked. That sounds like A poem. It's a message, Harry said quietly. Hermione turned the parchment slightly, and more words appeared beneath the first. The plan is lost not in ink, but in habit. It returns when kindness returns. The words settled, glowing gently, then dimmed to a warm gold that didn't demand attention. For a long moment, none of them spoke. It wasn't frightening. It was almost tender. The great hall, ancient and grand, seemed suddenly less like a room and more like a living memory, as if Hogwarts itself had held on to this seating plan the way someone holds onto a lullaby, waiting for the moment it might be needed again. Ron finally broke the silence, voice quiet. So, what does it want us to do? Rearrange everyone's seats? Hermione's lips curved faintly. I don't think it wants force. Harry looked at the parchment, then at the benches where the founders' names still shimmered softly. It wants us to notice, he said. Maybe that's the first step. As if in agreement, the parchment's edge lifted slightly, and a thin trail of light, pale gold this time, spilled from it onto the surface of the high table. The light moved slowly, forming a path. It didn't race ahead like an alarm. It didn't flash like a warning. It simply traced a gentle line across the hall, leading toward the center of the floor between the house tables. Hermione's breath caught, not with fear, but with recognition. It's guiding us, she whispered. Ron rubbed the back of his neck. Of course it is. Harry took a step forward, following the golden trail. Hermione and Ron came with him. At the center of the hall, where students usually walked between tables, the golden line stopped and began to circle slowly, forming a soft ring on the stone floor. The ring grew clearer, brighter, and then, like a sigh becoming visible, an old pattern appeared inside it. A seating pattern, not carved, not permanent. A gentle overlay of light, like the castle was showing them a memory of where chairs and benches had once been placed, circles within circles, paths connecting them, a design that felt calming, deliberate, and kind. Harry stood at the edge of the glowing pattern. It's beautiful, he murmured. Hermione nodded, her eyes shining. It's not about separating houses, she said. It's about reminding people they share the same hall. Ron looked at the pattern, then at the banners above. So, the seating plan is lost because everyone got used to sitting apart. Harry didn't answer immediately. He felt the truth of it in his bones, the way you feel truth when it is simple enough to be undeniable. The hall wasn't angry. It wasn't punishing anyone. It was remembering something gentle and offering that memory back. Hermione held the parchment close, as if it were fragile. This is only the first sign, she said softly. If the castle is showing us this, there's more. The candles above them flickered once, warmly. The banners stirred faintly, like fabric breathing, and the great hall, empty and calm, held its quiet mystery with care, inviting them, slowly, into the next layer of the story. Instead, it softened, like embers settling after a fire, remaining just bright enough to be remembered, not bright enough to demand attention. The circular pattern lay there quietly, breathing with the hall, as if it had no intention of vanishing now that it had finally been seen. Hermione lowered the parchment slowly. The words upon it had gone still, their golden glow dimming into something closer to memory than ink. "I don't think this is finished," she said softly. Harry felt it too, a faint pressure in the air, not heavy, not urgent, more like the gentle sense you get when someone is about to speak your name from across a room. Ron shifted his weight. Right, because when Hogwarts does something subtle, it's usually only the beginning. Almost on cue, the candles above them flickered again, not all at once, one by one. Starting at the far end of the hall, nearest the doors, a single candle dimmed slightly, then the next, and the next. The effect traveled slowly, overhead, like a ripple moving across a calm lake. Harry tilted his head back, watching. "They're changing." Hermione followed his gaze. "They're not going out," she said. "They're, adjusting." The light in the hall grew warmer, deeper, more amber than gold. Shadows lengthened along the walls, softening the edges of the longhouse tables and the tall stone columns. The enchanted ceiling above responded too. The clouds drifting across it slowed until they barely moved at all, suspended in a quiet, endless dusk. Ron exhaled. "All right, that's officially eerie." But even as he said it, his voice held no fear. The hall felt safe, enclosed, protective. Then the banners stirred. This time, it wasn't just a faint ripple. The great fabrics of Gryffindor red, Slytherin green, Ravenclaw blue, and Hufflepuff yellow swayed gently, as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist anywhere else in the castle. The movement was slow and rhythmic, like the rise and fall of breathing. Harry felt a strange tightening in his chest, not discomfort, but emotion he couldn't quite name. "They've stopped moving before," he said quietly, "in bad times." Hermione nodded. "Yes, but this isn't like that." Ron frowned. "How can you tell?" Hermione gestured toward the banners. "They're not stiff. They're not frozen. They're listening." As if responding to her words, the Ravenclaw banner dipped slightly forward, not enough to be dramatic, just enough to catch the candlelight differently. And then, without a sound, the emblem upon it shifted. Harry blinked. The eagle was still there. The colors were the same, but the lines of the embroidery softened, rearranging themselves just slightly. The crest seemed older, simpler, less defined by sharp borders. Hermione's breath caught. "That's not the modern design." Ron leaned closer. "You're right. It's different." Across the hall, the other banners began to change too, slowly, respectfully, like someone turning pages in a very old book. The Gryffindor lion's stance adjusted, becoming less rigid, more watchful. The Slytherin serpent's curves loosened, no longer coiled tightly in warning. The Hufflepuff badger's lines and grounding rather than guarding. The banners were not losing their identities. They were remembering older versions of themselves. Hermione whispered, almost to herself, "The houses before competition." The words seemed to echo, though nothing in the hall actually repeated them. Then came the sound, a low, resonant hum, not loud, not alarming. It felt like it came from everywhere at once, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. a vibration so gentle it could almost be mistaken for silence if you weren't paying attention. Harry felt it in his feet first. Ron noticed it in his hands. Do you feel that? Hermione nodded. The stones. The hum deepened slightly, then settled into a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat slowed by sleep. And as it did, something else appeared. Along the walls of the great hall, between the tall windows and the banners, faint lines of light emerged. They traced shapes, arches, symbols, patterns, so subtle they looked as though they'd always been there and were only now choosing to be seen. Harry approached the nearest wall. The light did not retreat. These aren't spells, Hermione said, stepping beside him. They're imprints. Imprints of what? Ron asked. Hermione reached out, palm hovering but above the stone, of intention, of purpose. The light formed an image, faint but unmistakable. Students sitting, not in rigid rows, but gathered, laughing quietly, passing bread, leaning in to listen to one another, robes of different colors brushing together. Harry swallowed. Their memories. Hermione nodded. Not individual ones, collective. The hum shifted again, barely noticeable, and the image changed. Now it showed the founders themselves, Rowena, Helga, Godric, Salazar, not standing apart, but seated together at the center of the hall. No banners above them, no divisions. Just 4 witches and wizards sharing a table, deep in conversation. Ron stared. That's not how we usually picture it. Hermione smiled faintly. No, it isn't. The image faded gently, replaced by another, students rising from their seats, helping one another, trading places without instruction, guided by something quieter than rules. Harry felt a warmth spread through him, slow and steady. Then the second twist revealed itself. Fully, the parchment in Hermione's hands grew warm again. Not hot, warm like a cup of tea held between your palms. She looked down, startled but calm. It's changing. The golden letters rearranged themselves, not fading this time, but flowing, like ink becoming water. New words formed, clear and deliberate. When the hall forgets stillness, it remembers it through you. Ron blinked. Through us? Hermione read on. The banners rest when the tables listen. Harry looked up at the banners, now gently swaying in their older forms. They're not asking us to do anything loud. Hermione shook her head. No, they're asking us to notice and to choose. As if in response, the hum beneath their feet softened further, becoming almost soothing. The light patterns on the walls dimmed slightly, focusing attention back toward the center of the hall. The circular seating pattern on the floor pulsed once, softly. Then something new happened. At the edges of the hall, near the house tables, faint outlines appeared, not of furniture, but of people. Harry's breath caught. They were not ghosts. They had no faces, no features, only silhouettes made of gentle light. Tall ones, small ones, shapes that suggested years, decades, centuries of students who had once sat here. They did not move toward the trio. They simply sat. Quiet, present. Ron swallowed hard. Are we seeing the past? Hermione considered. Not exactly. We're seeing echoes. The silhouettes were calm. Some leaned back as if relaxed. Others leaned forward as if listening. They formed no house clusters. They sat wherever the old pattern guided them. Harry felt something tighten behind his eyes, a familiar ache, not sadness, not joy, but something in between. "These are the people who forgot," he said quietly, "and the ones who were forgotten." The parchment shifted again. Remembrance is not loud, it is shared. The silhouettes began to fade, slowly, like mist lifting from a lake at dawn. One by one, they dissolved back into the stone, leaving no trace but the feeling they'd been there. The banners responded, swaying more gently now, their older forms blending seamlessly back into their familiar designs, not erased, but layered beneath, like a lullaby remembered even after waking. The candles brightened just a touch, restoring the hall's usual glow, though the warmth remained deeper than before. The hum beneath their feet quieted until it was no longer audible, but Harry suspected it never truly stopped. Hermione lowered the parchment, her expression peaceful. "That was the second sign," she said. Ron let out a slow breath. "I'm almost afraid to ask what the third one will be." Harry looked around the hall, now calm and familiar again, though changed in a way only those who had seen would ever know. "I don't think it's going to rush us." Hermione nodded. "No, Hogwarts rarely does." The parchment folded itself gently, not closing, but resting, as if content for now. The golden letters dimmed, leaving the title faintly visible. "The Lost Seating Plan of the Great Hall." Harry felt a deep sense of quiet settle over him. Not sleep exactly, but the kind of calm that comes just before it. The hall had spoken again, not with thunder, not with danger, but with memory, patience, and a Skaw's reminder that even the oldest magic preferred to move slowly, one gentle moment at a time. After the banners settled and the last echoes of the hall's quiet hum faded into the stone, nothing dramatic followed, and yet nothing returned fully to the way it had been before. Hogwarts had a talent for leaving behind the softest kind of anticipation, the sort that did not hurry you forward, but encouraged you to remain exactly where you were, attentive and unafraid. Harry noticed it first, in the way the air felt. It was lighter, somehow, as though the great hall had exhaled and was now resting. The familiar sense of polished wood and old stone lingered, but beneath them was something else, a warmth that felt less like magic and more like memory. Ron broke the silence with a whisper, as if speaking louder might disturb the calm. "So, do we wait?" Hermione considered this carefully. She did not look anxious or excited. Instead, she seemed thoughtful, her gaze drifting across the long tables, now empty, but no longer lonely. "I think," she said, "that this part isn't about watching, it's about noticing." Harry nodded slowly. The hall no longer displayed glowing patterns or shifting banners, but it felt attentive, like a room that listens even when no one speaks. They began to walk, not together at first, but gradually, instinctively, their steps aligned. They moved along the Gryffindor table, fingers brushing the backs of benches worn smooth by centuries of students sliding in and out of place. Each mark in the wood seemed to tell a story, not of great heroics, but of ordinary evenings, shared jokes, whispered worries, and the quiet relief of belonging. As they walked, Harry felt it again, that gentle sense of being guided without being led. The parchment in Hermione's hand remained still, no longer glowing, but warm, like it was waiting for the right moment to speak again. Halfway down the hall, Ron paused. "Did you hear that?" Harry listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, a sound so soft it might have been imagined the faint scrape of wood against stone. Hermione's eyes widened slightly. That came from the Hufflepuff table. They turned together. One of the benches, just one, had shifted. Not far, not abruptly. It had moved only a few inches, as if nudged by an unseen hand that knew exactly how much was enough. The motion was complete now, the bench resting in its new place, as though it had always belonged there. Ron stared. "Okay, that's new." Hermione approached slowly, her steps careful but calm. She crouched beside the bench, examining the floor beneath it. There were no marks, no scratches, no signs of force. "It didn't slide," she murmured. "It repositioned." Harry felt the same warmth he'd felt it earlier return, subtle but steady, like it remembered where it used to be. As if acknowledging his words, the bench creaked softly, not in protest, but in relief. They stood back, giving it space. Nothing else moved, but the feeling remained. The great hall was adjusting, not rearranging itself all at once. That would have been too obvious, too disruptive. Instead, it was making tiny corrections, small, thoughtful shifts guided by something older than habit. They continued walking. This time, the Ravenclaw table responded. A candle above it flickered, then steadied, casting its light at a slightly different angle. Shadows fell across the table's surface, revealing faint grooves, etched lines that had long since blended into the wood. Hermione traced one with her finger. "These are marks from place settings," she said, "but they're not aligned with the current arrangement." Ron leaned in. "So, the table used to be set differently?" "Yes," Hermione said softly, "and not just once." As if responding, the shadows shifted again, revealing what more lines, overlapping, intersecting, forming a quiet map of countless past configurations. Harry closed his eyes briefly, and in that moment, he could almost hear it, the low murmur of voices, the scrape of chairs, the gentle rhythm of shared meals stretching back through time. When he opened his eyes, the shadows had softened, but the sense of presence remained. They reached the center of the hall, where the circular pattern had first appeared. It was no longer visible, but Harry could feel it beneath his feet, like a memory held in stone. Hermione unfolded the parchment again. The letters did not glow this time. Instead, they were simply there, clear, steady, patient. "What is lost returns slowly," it read. Ron exhaled. "That seems to be Hogwarts' motto tonight." Hermione smiled faintly. "It's not rushing us. That's important." Harry looked around. The hall was quiet, but not empty. Every bench, every table, every candle seemed attentive, as though waiting for the next small thing. And then, from the far end of the hall, near the doors, came another sound. Footsteps, Harry tensed slightly, then relaxed when he saw who it was. Professor McGonagall entered the hall with her usual composed stride, though her expression softened when she noticed the students gathered at the center. She did not ask what they were doing. She simply joined them, her gaze sweeping the hall with a quiet understanding. "I thought I felt something settle," she said calmly. "It seems I was correct." Hermione held out the parchment without a word. McGonagall read it carefully. When she finished, she nodded once. "The Founders valued balance," she said, "not just between houses, but between people." Ron shifted. "So, what happens next?" McGonagall considered this. "That depends on whether the hall feels heard." As if to answer, another bench moved, this one at the Slytherin table. It rotated slightly, angling itself toward the center of the hall rather than facing straight ahead. Harry felt a small smile tug at his lips. "It's listening." Hermione nodded, "and responding." The suspense did not rise sharply. It deepened instead, like water growing just a little cooler as you wade further in. There was no threat, no danger, only the quiet anticipation of understanding something long forgotten. One by one, small changes continued. A chair shifted closer to another. A candle lowered itself slightly, bringing its light nearer to the table. A banner's shadow fell differently, softening the space between houses rather than emphasizing division. None of it was dramatic, none of it demanded attention, but together the changes formed a pattern, a slow return to something gentler. Harry realized then that the suspense did not come from wondering what would happen next. It came from realizing that Hogwarts was remembering, and that memory, once awakened, could not be hurried or undone. The hall was not asking for action, it was asking for presence. And as they stood there, breathing in the calm, watching the smallest details shift into place, Harry felt certain of one thing. The greatest magic in the Great Hall had never been the floating candles or enchanted ceiling. It had always been the quiet way it held everyone together, waiting patiently for them to remember. With the hall resting in its new, thoughtful stillness, the four of them stood quietly for a moment, allowing the calm to settle. The suspense that lingered did not press forward. It hovered gently, like a question waiting to be answered only when the listener felt ready. Professor McGonagall was the first to move. Her footsteps measured as she walked along the high table. She paused beside one of the chairs, resting her hand on its back. "This hall has always reflected us," she said softly. "When students change, so does it, but only when it is allowed to." Hermione watched the way McGonagall touched the chair, not possessively, but respectfully. "Then maybe what it's asking," Hermione said, "isn't for us to rearrange anything, but to choose how we belong to it." Ron scratched his head, considering this. "So, no spells, no instructions, just decisions?" Harry felt the weight of that word settle comfortably in his chest. Decisions, not heroic ones, not dangerous ones, the kind that quietly shape the world without announcing themselves. "I think," Harry said slowly, "it wants us to move the way we feel is right, not the way we're used to." The hall seemed to approve. A nearby candle brightened just a fraction, its flame steady and warm. Hermione nodded. Then let's explore, not to change things, but to understand them. They split up gently, never straying too far from one another. Harry wandered toward the Ravenclaw table, running his hand along the edge as he walked. He noticed how the benches here sat slightly closer together than before, inviting conversation rather than separation. When he paused, he felt no pressure to move on, only the quiet sense that this place welcomed reflection. Ron drifted toward the Hufflepuff table, his expression thoughtful. He pulled out a bench carefully and sat, not dramatically, just naturally. The bench creaked softly, settling beneath his weight, as though pleased to be used. Again, Ron exhaled and leaned back, his shoulders relaxing. "This feels nice," he said, "like sitting down after a long day." Hermione explored the space between tables where the circular pattern had once glowed. She walked the invisible lines slowly, her steps deliberate, tracing the shape with her body rather than her wand. When she reached the center, she stopped and closed her eyes. "I think," she said quietly, "this was never about houses at all. It was about connection." Harry felt drawn toward her, standing just at the edge of the unseen circle. He did not step into the center. Instead, he chose a place beside her, close enough to share the space without claiming it. Professor McGonagall watched from a short distance away, her expression thoughtful but peaceful. She did not interfere. This was not her moment to guide. It was hers to witness. As the students made these small personal choices, the hall responded in equally subtle ways. The benches Ron sat upon aligned themselves slightly more toward the center. The candlelight above Harry softened, illuminating the table rather than casting shadows between seats. The space Hermione traced seemed to grow warmer, as though the stone beneath her feet recognized the pattern of movement it had once known so well. None of them spoke spells. None of them gave instructions. They simply chose where to stand, where to sit, where to linger. Harry felt something shift, not around him, but within. He had always been defined by where he belonged: Gryffindor, chosen family, familiar places. But here, in this moment, he realized belonging did not need labels. It needed presence. Hermione opened her eyes. "I think we're meant to leave it like this," she said. "Not perfect, just acknowledged." Ron stood slowly, giving the bench a final pat before stepping away. "I'll admit," he said, "I kind of like the idea that Hogwarts remembers things even when we don't, Professor." McGonagall approached them then, her voice gentle. "That is the nature of places built with care," she said. "They hold space until it is needed again." Hermione folded the parchment once more. This time, it did not warm beneath her fingers. It felt complete, resting. Harry glanced around the hall, taking in the long tables, the banners, the ceiling that had resumed its slow drift of clouds. Everything looked familiar again, but subtly kinder, less rigid. "Do you think anyone else will notice?" Ron asked. McGonagall smiled faintly, not consciously, and that is precisely the point. As they prepared to leave, the hall did not close behind them or shift dramatically. It simply remained, settled, attentive, content. Harry took one last look, before the doors swung shut. He felt no urge to remember every detail. The hall did not require that of him. It only required that he had been there and that he had chosen to listen. And that, Harry realized, was more than enough. They did not leave the great hall right away. Instead, they lingered near the doors, not out of uncertainty, but because something gentle still unfolded, something quieter than action, yet deeper than observation. The hall had grown still again, but this time it was a different stillness. It felt complete, like a sentence that had reached its final word and no longer needed to continue. Hermione was the first to notice the change. She paused mid-step and turned back toward the center of the hall. "Wait," she said softly. Harry felt it too now, a warmth, subtle but unmistakable, spreading outward from the place where the invisible circle lay beneath the stone. It was not glowing, not humming, but it was present, like the aftertaste of a familiar song. The parchment in Hermione's hands stirred, not with light, with weight. She unfolded it slowly, careful not to rush the moment. The parchment did not resist. It did not hurry. It simply revealed one final line of text, written plainly, without flourish. The seeding was never lost. Ron blinked. Then what was? Hermione read on. Only the reason for it. Harry felt the words settle into him, not as a revelation meant to surprise, but as one meant to soothe. Professor McGonagall stepped closer, her gaze thoughtful. The founders had not arranged the hall to separate, she said quietly. They arranged it to remind. Hermione nodded slowly, understanding unfolding in layers. The houses were meant to guide identity, not confine it. The seating was never about where you belonged permanently. It was about where you needed to be at that moment. Harry thought of his years at Hogwarts, of nights spent surrounded by Gryffindor red, of times when comfort came easily, and times when it didn't. He realized now that the hall had always shifted subtly around them, responding not to rules, but to needs he hadn't known how to name. Ron swallowed. So when it felt wrong sometimes, it wasn't the hall. No, McGonagall said gently. It was the forgetting. As if responding to the truth spoken aloud, the great hall offered one final gift, not a spectacle, but a vision. For just a moment, the air shimmered, not with light, but with memory. Harry saw the hall as it once had been, not at any single point in time, but across many. He saw students arriving uncertain, finding comfort beside strangers who later became friends. He saw laughter crossing house lines without thought. He saw quiet moments where someone chose a different seat and felt, for the first time that day, understood. Hermione saw it too. Her breath caught, not in shock, but in recognition. The seating plan wasn't fixed, she whispered. It was alive. Ron let out a slow breath. Blimey, that explains a lot. The vision faded gently, leaving no trace but understanding. The parchment in Hermione's hands softened, the words fading until only the title remained. Then even that disappeared. The parchment itself became ordinary again, its work complete. Harry felt no disappointment at its silence. There was nothing more it needed to say. The insight did not arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived like permission. Permission to belong without labels. Permission to rest without proving anything. Permission to sit where comfort found you, not where habit placed you. Harry turned toward the doors, feeling lighter than he had moments before. So the hall didn't need us to fix anything. Hermione smiled softly. No, it needed us to remember why it existed. Professor McGonagall nodded, and to leave it free to remember on its own. As they stepped away, the hall did not shift again. It did not glow or move or whisper. It simply remained, balanced, whole. Harry realized then that the true magic of the Great Hall was not in its enchantments, but in its patience. It waited, not for heroes, not for grand spells, but for quiet understanding. And now, having been seen and acknowledged, it could rest once more. The insight settled gently over them, like a blanket drawn up at the end of a long day. The seating plan had never been about order. It had always been about care, and with that understanding held softly between them, they turned the final corner, leaving the great hall behind, not changed forever, but remembered again, exactly as it had hoped to be. The corridors beyond the great hall welcomed them back with familiar quiet. Torchlight glowed softly against the stone walls, steady and warm, as if the castle itself had settled into a deeper rest. Their footsteps echoed gently, unhurried, and each sound felt less like a disturbance and more like a reminder that Hogwarts was still awake in its own calm way. Harry walked a little behind the others, letting the moment stretch. The insight from the hall lingered within him, not as something to analyze, but as something to carry, light, reassuring, and complete. He felt no need to speak it aloud. Some understandings were meant to remain quiet. Ron broke the silence first, though even his voice seemed softer than usual. "You know," he said, hands tucked into his pockets, "I don't think I've ever felt the hall like that before." Hermione smiled, adjusting her grip on the now ordinary parchment. "That's because it wasn't trying to teach us anything new," she said. "It was reminding us of something we already knew, but forgot to listen to." Professor McGonagall paused at the junction where the stairs curved upward, her expression thoughtful and kind. "Hogwarts has many lessons," she said. "Some are written in books, others are felt. Tonight was one of the latter." She inclined her head toward them, then continued on her way, her robes whispering softly as she disappeared around the corner. There was no sense of finality in her departure, only reassurance. The castle did not close chapters abruptly. It let them fade gently into memory. Harry, Ron, and Hermione resumed walking, eventually parting ways near the common room corridor. There were no dramatic goodbyes, just quiet nods, shared smiles, and the unspoken understanding that something meaningful had passed between them, something that did not require explanation. Harry climbed the stairs alone, the familiar turns and landings guiding him upward. Portraits along the walls slept peacefully, their painted expressions relaxed, as if they too had sensed the hall's return to balance. Even the staircases seemed calmer tonight, their usual impatience replaced by a willingness to stay where they were. When Harry reached his dormitory, the room was dim and still. Curtains were drawn, beds occupied, and the steady breathing of his classmates filled the air like a gentle rhythm. He moved quietly, changing without hurry, allowing the weight of the day and the night to ease away. As he lay down, he found his thoughts drifting back to the great hall, not to the magic itself, but to the feeling it left behind. The sense that belonging was not something to be earned or proven, but something that existed quietly, waiting to be acknowledged. The castle did not ask him to remember every detail. It only asked that he rest. Harry closed his eyes, the warmth of the blankets grounding him, the calm of the night settling fully now. Somewhere far below, the great hall stood, empty once more, its tables aligned, its candles steady, its stones content. And Hogwarts, having been heard, returned to its watchful silence. Nothing more needed to happen. The story had found its rest, and so had he. As the night deepened, Hogwarts held its quiet like a promise. The towers stood steady against the sky, the windows dim with sleep, and the grounds hid beneath a soft blanket of starlight. Nothing hurried, nothing waited to be solved. The castle was exactly as it needed to be. In the dormitories, breaths rose and fell in peaceful rhythm. Dreams moved gently, untroubled by worry or expectation. Somewhere beneath the stone floors, ancient walls remembered countless nights just like this one, nights when the world softened and even magic learned how to rest. If you imagine the great hall now, it is calm and empty. The long tables stand where they always have, yet they feel kinder somehow. The candles glow steadily, not to illuminate anything in particular, but simply to be there. The banners knit and hang quietly, their colors deep and comforting, no longer asking to be noticed. Hogwarts does not sleep the way people do. It watches, it listens, it holds space, and tonight it does so with a gentle satisfaction, as though something important has been set back into place without ever being disturbed. You don't need to remember the details of this story as you drift toward sleep. You don't need to hold on to the names or the moments. Let them fade naturally, like footprints in soft snow. What matters is the feeling they leave behind, the calm, the warmth, the quiet reassurance that you belong wherever you are allowed to rest. As you settle deeper into comfort, imagine the castle breathing slowly, in time with you, each breath steady, each moment unhurried. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to discover tonight. The world can wait. For now, let your thoughts grow lighter. Let the edges of the day blur gently into stillness. You are safe. You are welcome. And just like the Great Hall, you are allowed to be exactly where you are. Sleep comes softly here, and when it does, it carries you peacefully into quiet dreams.